Canada is funding terrorism through the United Nations. Well, so is every other Western country, the U.S. under Donald Trump excluded, through UNRWA, the worst part of the United Nations. Now, many of you hate the United Nations for good reason, and we can go into them, but you might not know about the worst part of the United Nations, UNRWA, UNRWA, the organization set up to help the Palestinian refugees in the 1950s. Now, you might have seen the documentary 10 years ago where we've been showing that Western-funded curriculum in Gaza teaches jihad, martyrdom, violence against Jews, and generally anyone who does support Israel or is against global Islamism. It is a terrorist training camp. I'm sure you've seen all of the Hamas kindergarten videos in Gaza where they march around, they do mock executions of Jews. This is funded with your tax dollars. You are funding this. Now, Americans can say, why are we funding Israel? And you're not really funding Israel. You're giving Israel money that they then have to spend on American defense contractors. But many anti-Semites in Canada will say, why are we funding this? And the answer is, you're not funding Israel. Canada does not fund Israel. We have free trade agreements with Israel. So you can buy things in Israel, like we give them money and they would give us microchips. But this is like saying, Daniel is funding Loblaws because I went there and bought apples. No, I bought apples. I happened to buy it from Loblaws. That is a relationship. But Canada is funding Hamas, yay, through UNRWA. So yes, they do teach jihad, but as we've seen, nearly every UNRWA institution in the Gaza Strip has weapons inside of it, tunnels dug underneath it, and has been booby-trapped to the nines. Do you think the United Nations workers did not know that people were literally building tunnels inside their institutions? That's a long, expensive, very loud process that no one blew the whistle on. Nearly every UNRWA institution has tunnels under it. The Hamas tunnels are filled with UN relief cement. All the relief goes straight to Hamas. All the on-the-ground members of UNRWA are Hamas members. All of them. Because Hamas controls the Gaza Strip. So the people who get and collaborate with the United Nations are Hamas members. And the people at the United Nations are sympathetic to terrorism, communism, and global shenanigans. We've known this for a while. But what exactly is UNRWA and why is it so terrible? So not only does it fund terrorism, we're literally funding terrorism and building these tunnels, Western tax dollars. But why was UNRWA set up? To help Palestinian refugees. But here's the secret you're going to learn. Palestinians are fake refugees. Cut that out, Muslim Brotherhood, and use it to attack me. I don't care. UNRWA was set up in the 50s. Now, most refugees, my friends, I have lots of friends who are former refugees, political prisoners. They go through the UNHCR. Every country in the world, when you want to be a refugee, you apply at the UNHCR, except Palestinians. They are forever refugees because my friends who came here in, let's say, 2012 as refugees have been in Canada for over 10 years. They're no longer considered refugees. They're permanent residents of Canada or Canadian citizens. They're no longer refugees. You lose your refugee status after you've integrated into a country, if you're under the UNHCR. But if you're under UNRWA, you never lose refugee status. In fact, Palestinians are forever refugees. There's no way to remove refugee status from Palestinians. This is why there are refugee camps inside Gaza. What are you talking about? And there are houses in cement pit. They just call them refugee camps because UNRWA is involved. So, if you look at the definition of a refugee under UNRWA, it's someone who has a family member who lived in Israel for 2 years between, 1917 to 1948, and then is no longer in the territory. So they don't even need to be forcibly displaced, right? Most of the Arab refugees during the Israeli War of Independence, according to UNRWA's own founding statistics, over half of them never saw an Israeli soldier. They were moved off their lands by Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian, or other Arab armies who said, move, we need to use your land for your house for military purposes, and once we kill all the Jews, you can return. They lost the war. 850,000 Jewish refugees were created from the Arab states. They were integrated into Israel and no longer became refugees because they were integrated. The 700,000 Palestinian refugees were put in literal open-air prison concentration camps. In Lebanon, Palestinians literally were not allowed to leave their refugee camps until the 1990s. They're still considered second, maybe even third-class citizens if you go, and only recently were allowed work permits in Lebanon, which cares so much about the Palestinians, if you ask Qasem Nasrallah and Hezbollah. They care so much about Palestinians, but just not inside Lebanon. Filth. Absolute filth, third-class citizens. So, a Palestinian refugee, again, let's say there's a man who worked on an Israeli or Zionist farm from 1934 to 1936. During the Arab revolts, things got messy, and he says, okay, I'm moving out of here. I'm going to Egypt. In 1948, he became a Palestinian refugee. Wow. Voluntary move to Egypt. He's a Palestinian refugee. He marries a nice woman. They have a kid. What is that kid? That kid is a Palestinian refugee born in Egypt. That kid goes on, grows up at 18, goes to Europe, gets educated, top schools, becomes a successful businessman, meets a lovely woman, marries the Princess of Luxembourg. They have a baby. Is that baby royalty? No, it's a Palestinian refugee. Literally. This is the definition of Palestinian refugees. This is why Israel keeps creating more Palestinian refugees. Oh my God, there's now 3 million Palestinian refugees created by Israel. Yeah, what's that? They're just having babies. That's called having babies. It's not real. But the real kicker is the Palestinian refugees get 4 times the amount of funding as regular refugees. And then the Arab countries that keep these Palestinians in these little concentration camps, open-air prisons, whatever you want to call them, they get tons of money from stupid Western countries who fund this nonsense. It's a money laundering scheme for the Arab nations. And the direct reason they wanted to create this back in the 1950s and 60s, according to the Arab nations themselves, is they wanted to use the Palestinian refugees as a population bomb weapon to put back into Israel to destroy them, right? They wanted to flood. This is the right of return for Palestinians. They just want to take all the refugees they created. Again, this hypothetical princess I've created is a Palestinian refugee. And Israel, and there can be no peace until all these different refugees are brought into Israel and ethnically cleanse it of Jews. Okay. This organization is one of the key driving factors in Palestinian and global terrorism. Wake up, people. This is what we fund. We fund this nonsense. If you actually want to help the Palestinians, get rid of UNRWA. And if they want to be refugees, have them deal with the UNHCR like everyone else. But we have this entire corrupt system where Arab leaders are financially incentivized to keep these Palestinians poor, literally locked in cages because they can get money, like for helping these refugees. They skim it off the top. It's a big money laundering scheme, and they keep the Palestinians mad and blame the Jews. You pay for this. The Arab nations don't pay for this. They're not stupid enough to fund this. They just rely on stupid Westerners and silly white people to, we need to help the refugees and fund this. And we end up funding terrorism. So every single UNRWA institution is a terrorist training camp. Every single one is a terrorist hotbed. Every single one in the Gaza Strip is a terrorist hotbed. And we need to stop funding this. Canada gives tens of millions of dollars a year to these places. Justin Trudeau keeps upping the ante, keeps sending more and more and more to this organization. And even as more and more evidence comes and shows that all the money you're giving to UNRWA goes to teach jihad and actually practice jihad and buy weapons for the jihad, we throw more and more and more money at it. So, if you are one of these isolationist people who are like, I don't care. I don't care about Israel. I don't care about Palestine. I don't care about any of it. Just stop funding it. I actually support this position. I don't think anyone needs to care about this if they don't care. But you have to acknowledge, if you're a Canadian, you are not funding Israel. You are funding Hamas through UNRWA, which needs to be defunded yesterday.